Thank you all for coming. I am Pat Chase, and I want to thank Michelle Sharp and all the crew here at the Indiana State Library for putting this on, making this available. And I understand we have a lot of people via Zoom. Hello, Zoom people. Good to see you. Thank you. I hope that my audio is working. Does it seem to be working, Michelle?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's good. All right, so my presentation today is about the man Jonathan Knight, a book that I wrote on him. I did 6 or 7 years of research on the book to get all the data. And one of the first places I started was right here at the Indiana State Library. And I was able to find his maps that he drew on surveying the national road in 1827. And also they have the field notes here as he crossed Indiana in that summer. The maps are, a couple of the maps are back there on the table if you want to look at them. And they're kind of crazy because they were originally at the National Archives in Washington. And they, in the 1930s, they sent them with this way that they copied papers back then. So it's white print on black. And Monique, who was working here at the time, she was able to transpose those into white, black on white. So anyway, thanks to everybody here at the Indiana State Library and all that you have done. So this is a copy of the cover of my book. And I grew up in Knightstown, Indiana, and that's why I have the interest in Jonathan Knight. Our town was named for Jonathan Knight in 1827, and I wondered why the heck the guy that founded our town would name our town after Jonathan Knight. My childhood friend and I, Dave Steele, bought the old building where the historical museum in Knightstown is called Historic Knightstown. And so that kind of got my interest going. Here's our old building down on the square in downtown Knightstown. There's my old friend Dave Steele back when we were a little younger. That's when I was about 1963. And there I am at the world famous Hoosier Gym, hitting an offhand hook shot. Jonathan Knight. Okay, for some reason, I want to add, we've got this barn that I took a picture of about 20 years ago, and we do not know why it's on the screen, but for your curiosity's sake, that is a round barn up in the thumb of Michigan. It's one of the most beautiful barns I've ever been to. And so anyway, that's kind of a little odd deal. We got this barn. We don't know why. So Jonathan Knight, for whom Knightstown was named, this photograph is the only other noted photograph of Jonathan Knight, the one that's on the cover of the book, and this one here. There are some family members that do have the original copy of this photograph. And why is my computer doing that? And so anyway, Knight was uniquely born on November 22nd, and he died on November 22nd. Born in 1787 and died in 1858. He lived for 71 years. And his parents were Giles and Mary Knight, and these folks were Quakers, and his ancestors, not his parents, these are his ancestors that came to America with William Penn in the 1680s. So he was a long line of Quakers. And probably the first thing you should say about Knight was he was a devout Quaker, and this was what made him the man he was. His dad, Abel, was a weaver. He was a teacher. He was a surveyor. His mother was Anna Smith Knight. Knight, even though we're here in Indiana, Knight was a lifelong Pennsylvanian. He worked in Indiana. He worked elsewhere. But he was born in Bucks County Pennsylvania, and then at the age of 12, they moved to Western Pennsylvania to what is then known as East Bethlehem Township in Washington County. And they were members of the Westland Monthly Meeting, not to be confused. There's a Westland Monthly Meeting over in Hancock County, and I did a little research on that, and those folks said they don't have any recollection of how that would be connected. So, but anyway, the Westland Monthly Meeting in Washington County is where Knight practiced his religion. And so he married in 1809 Anne Heston, and sometimes he calls her Anne, sometimes he calls her Nancy. And then, as I said, in 1858, he passed away there in Washington County. So here's this red dot over here is just give you some idea of where Washington County, Pennsylvania is in the far western, and it borders today West Virginia, or back then Virginia. Knight had a substantial career. He was a mathematician, he was a surveyor, he was a cartographer, he was a civil engineer, he was a railroad executive, and the main thing that we talk about here in Indiana is he was the commissioner of the National Road and the development of the National Road. Politically, he was a county commissioner back in Pennsylvania. He served in the state Senate in Pennsylvania for 6 years. He was actually a state senator in Pennsylvania the summer that he surveyed, 1827, that he surveyed here through Indiana. Then he served in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1856, but he was a lifelong farmer. If you probably walked up and asked him what he was, he would say he was a farmer, and he was a lifelong farmer and was quite an innovator in farm techniques. And most of his sons, he had 7 sons that lived to be adults, were in the farming business. His oldest son, William, made this statement that I got highlighted here in yellow, that he was widely known and esteemed. He was the most famous surveyor in this section of the country, and he became one of the most eminent civil engineers of his day in the United States. And I will explain that to you a little more. As a mathematician, he had very little formal education. He was basically a self-taught individual. I suppose we could say he was homeschooled. He really didn't go to school, but his father was a teacher, so he would have learned a lot from his father. He naturally understood mathematics. They talk about how he would go out, he would have a problem, he'd go chop wood, and he'd solve it in his head and come back and write down the answer. The book that he would have had access to, a couple books back then, is this Dilworth's Arithmetic, which was back then kids didn't have books. They all went to the one-room schoolhouse and they got taught by the teacher from the book. And Abe Lincoln and Daniel Webster also learned from this book. And then a little later in life, he got a copy of Bonnie Castle's Algebra, and he basically taught himself algebra, and he solved all these mathematical problems. Here's the original 1773 Dilworth's Arithmetic, which was written in England, but it was published in America for decades and decades, as was the Bonnie Castle. There's Bonnie Castle, the guy that wrote all the algebra book. So my research, as I said, brought me here, and I found the maps and the work that he did coming across Indiana in 1827. The county that he lives in is Washington County, Pennsylvania, and there's a college there called Washington and Jefferson College. So I went over there 2 different times, and in the library of that institution, there's quite a bit on Knight. And his great-granddaughter donated many items like in the 1950s or 60s. And one of them is this 500-page mathematical book, where he solved all these mathematical problems. It was kind of a hobby of his. And this was after he had retired. And so he had fun proving Diophantus's algebraic theories that had been around since 200 AD. And so here is one page that I took a picture of, and we all can understand this quite well, I'm sure. In my book, go back. In my book, so the mathematics professor there at Washington and Jefferson College, he was aware of this 500-page document, and I asked him to write for my book a description of what this 500-page was. And so he wrote about 1,000-word description on what this book is, math. And I was a C- math student. So anyway, in the book, the Jonathan Knight book that I wrote, the professor there has explained his math. But with his mathematical brain, Knight was able to become a very successful surveyor and cartographer. The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal was instrumental. It went from Washington, D.C. All the way up to Cumberland, Maryland. And so freight would go parallel the Potomac River. He was one of the surveyors of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And then he made the Mellish map of Washington County. I'll show you a picture of that. That was in 1816, 1817. And then he got the job surveying the National Road in Washington County in 1817 and 1819. He also platted Bealsville and Hillsborough, two little towns on the National Road there in Pennsylvania. He did that in 1819 and 20. But then the reason we all here in Indiana are interested tonight, he was appointed commissioner surveyor of the National Road for Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Later, he would survey and map and make maps for the B&O Railroad. Here is his 1816 map of Washington County, Pennsylvania. One account said he worked on it for a year. You can imagine there's every little creek and road that's in there. And this guy Mellish, and so here's a signature. My pointer does not work with this thing. I can't point, but I can point. But anyway, Knight's signature is on this map. And so this guy Mellish was kind of famous cartographer. He was the first guy that drew a map that showed what became United North America, that showed both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. The state of Pennsylvania retained him to make a map for the state of Pennsylvania, and Mellish subcontracted, in my terms, for Knight to survey, make a map here of Washington County. My mouse is showing there. Okay, good. All right. I just got this. So here's the National Road going through Pennsylvania. This little red line right here. I don't have a mouse pad, but we're doing pretty good. So here's Bealsville today. It's a little village you can drive through on the National Road there in Washington County, Pennsylvania. And then here's this, it was, anyway, it's this other town. It was Hillsborough, and now it's Scenery Hill. They changed the name of it. Here's a little sketch of downtown Washington, Pennsylvania in the era when Knight would have lived there. Here comes the stagecoach into town. So here's the National Road. That's kind of why we're all here, or why I'm here. The National Road was originally devised, the idea of building the National Road was by many people, but in 1806, Thomas Jefferson proposed it to Congress that they appropriate the money to build a road from Cumberland, Maryland to the Ohio River. Of course, the Northwest Territory had been acquired. So how are you going to get freight? How are you going to get freight from, get my mouse, here's Cumberland, Maryland. So there was already a road, and like I said earlier, the C&O Canal came to Cumberland, Maryland. But then to get the Ohio River, you have to go over the Appalachian Mountains. Some of them are 4,000 feet. So there wasn't much of a road there then. So the federal government appropriated the money to build a interstate highway through Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And it was the states' rights people opposed it. They said, I live in South Carolina. Why would I want to pay for a road that goes through Pennsylvania and Virginia? And so, but anyway, it passed and the money was appropriated and it was administered by the Treasury Department. And so this leg of the National Road was built from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia. It was completed in 1819, and Knight was involved in the surveying here of the last leg through Pennsylvania and on over to Wheeling. So because he was a noted surveyor and they hired him to do that. So then a few years later, the Congress appropriates the money to build the national road through the states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, with it passing through the state capitals. So it's supposed to pass through Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Vandalia, Illinois, which was the capital of Illinois at that time. So that money was appropriated in 1823 and it was implemented in 1825. The national road was the largest expenditure by the federal government prior to the Civil War. They spent millions, about 3-point-something million. It was the largest financial expenditure by the federal government and prior to the Civil War. So it was a big deal. And so they wanted to hire the best man to lay out the road, the man with the most experience and the man that everybody knew was had the intellectual capability and the physical capability to do so. Knight was well connected politically. As I said, he was elected state senator there in Pennsylvania. And this was administered by the Department of War. The first leg of the National Road was administered by the Department of Treasury, but this was administered by the Department of War, and it was, did have some military reasons to be built. So the Secretary of War was James Barbour, and this was during the John Quincy Adams administration. Everybody remembers John Quincy Adams administration. And so Quincy Adams was in favor of internal improvements. So his Secretary of War was Barbour, and he says of Knight that is relying on his judgment and fidelity, and the location is entirely left to him. So they're letting Knight, they trust Knight to take care of everything. And then Knight does his surveying. This is a little after the quote from Knight at the bottom here. It says, I have under a conviction of imperious duty located and reported the direct route, leaving the final determination of the question to the government. So he says, here's the straight line, here's what it's done. And so this is the report to Congress. They have to vote the funds now to build the road. All right, this is a copy of the map that is back there on that back table that has been turned into black on white. It does not show up very well here at all, but this is the entire state of Indiana. And down here at the bottom is Knight's signature. Right there is Knight's signature. And it says Jonathan Knight here, Commissioner So he wasn't just a surveyor, he was the commissioner, and then he hired a crew of surveyors to work on this. And I guesstimate it was a crew of 8 to 10 men. And they had a wagon. I have some record of them having a wagon. And of course, they're going through this primeval forest land. There's all these great trees. And if you read his field notes, he describes trees a lot. He'll say, and so the field notes have the longitude, latitude, minutes. If you're a surveyor, I'm not. And then a lot of times over the side, he'll say next to the sugar tree, meaning a maple tree, or next to or down from the buckeye tree, or 100 yards from the sycamore tree. So that's in his field notes. So this was, an arduous event to go through this big timbered country. And so they would have worked hard. Here's that map down here. I got Knight's signature showing you down here. And then, of course, I'm from Knightstown, and the turquoise line is where the road was built. Somebody took those maps and put some different kind of lines. I don't think Knight originally drew in turquoise. And but here's the Big Blue River. So Richmond would be over here to our east. And then here's the Big Blue River. Right here is where today Knightstown is. And then also here is a very interesting thing I discovered. There was a state road in Indiana that went east to west prior to the national road being built. If you know your Indiana history, Richmond in 1827 was the biggest town in Indiana in 1827. The Treaty of Greenville in 1812 or 14 allowed America to have control of most of Ohio and the part that's now Wayne County, Richmond, and Centerville. So the Treaty with the Indians. So anyway, all these Quakers and many others moved to Richmond, and Richmond in 1827 was the largest town in Indiana. Along in there somewhere, New Albany, down on the Ohio River, would become the largest town and surpass Richmond. But Indianapolis is only a few years old. 1821, 22, and I believe it was, then they actually moved the government here in 1825, and Ralston platted Indianapolis before Knight got here. So here's Knight's map of Indianapolis, my blow up of that, and you can see Fall Creek here, and here's Eagle Creek, and then he's got these dots here showing the lots here in Indianapolis. So here comes the national road from the east, and like I said, somebody has drawn this line, and Knight deviated from the straight line to cross the White River perpendicular. If he'd crossed it right straight across, the bridge would have had to be much longer, and the abutments would have been potentially damaged by the flow of the stream. So all his, I think it's safe for me to say, all his bridges were perpendicular to the streams. So he would curve the road so that you came at the stream at true perpendicular. Another little thing here, here's Knight shows the road to Brookville. In 1821, Brookville became the federal land office. If you wanted to buy land in Marion County, you had to get on your horse or walk down to Brookville and buy your land down at the Brookville office, and I'm not quite sure how long that was until you were able to buy land somewhere other from the federal government. After the treaty, the federal government owned all this land. Indiana did not own all this land, the federal government. So you bought your land from the federal government. So here's Knight's little blow up of Indianapolis. And then here's, I did this blow up of Terre Haute. So as he comes through Terre Haute, his description, he spends more time talking about Terre Haute than anything because the biggest bridge on the national road was in Terre Haute over the White River. And on the west side of the Wabash is kind of a big swampland. So he surveyed 2 or 3 different ways to get the bridge over the Wabash, and it turned out to be the longest. These bridges, let's see if I got this. I'm going to say this about the bridges. So the bridges over the White River and over the Wabash, and many of the bridges, smaller bridges between here and Richmond, were covered bridges. They were wooden covered bridges, and Knight was not involved in the construction of the road. He surveyed it, he laid it out. He would make field notes saying there's a good stand of gravel over here. This would be a good elevation. You're going to have to do your bridge kind of this way. He'd make some notes to that effect, but Knight was not involved in the construction of the national road. That wouldn't take place until a couple, 3 years later. But Knight laid out where these bridges were supposed to be made, and he made them. This right here is a copy of the field notes that you can see how it's the white writing on black, and that's the way. So I contacted the National Archives several times and never did drive over there. But somewhere this book is in Washington, D.C., where it's black on white. And but these books are here. They're about 30 pages, maybe more, 40 pages. There's 2 books, one from Richmond to Indianapolis, and then Indianapolis to the Illinois border. And these are all his field notes. So here's his coordinates over here on this page, and then he makes his comments over here. And one comment that we from Henry County find, so going along the Blue River, he writes down the Shelbyville and Newcastle Road. So in 1827, there was already a road that paralleled the Blue River from Newcastle to Shelbyville. And then this is the western boundary of Knightstown. He mentions Montgomery Creek here in these field notes. And I wish we had better video of them. So I mentioned one of the best things I found was his annual report on his trek through Indiana. So he had to write to his superior, General McComb, and then they forwarded that on to Congress, describing the surveying and the layout. And so there's all this detail that Knight gives in this report, and it's very, very telling. I found one for Ohio, and this one's all typed up, printed up. I don't know who printed it, but somebody did in 1827, I assume. I found one for Ohio, but it's all handwritten. It's not presented like this. And of course, that's a whole nother story. But since we're in Indiana, we're talking about the Indiana. And he wrote this in February of 1828. And so, wait, I went backwards. So yeah, this 12-page report, the Department of War And so the description of the terrain and the difficulties and so I showed you that little map over by Knightstown. There was a community there called West Liberty. And I believe that Knight, he had to shoot the line. So he had to know where his end point was on the west side of Illinois. So I found two little things where he mentioned that he was over there in 1820, but I don't know how he got there, but I kind of assumed that he came through Indiana and might have stopped at West Liberty and might have met the people that later became the Knightstown leaders. So this survey across Indiana actually went a lot faster than I ever thought. He started June 11th, and you can follow it in his field notes, and he got to Indianapolis by July 3rd. And as I say here in the yellow, he gave a minute description of the country through which his party had passed, being heavily timbered and thinly settled. They made their way with difficulty. And then, yeah, this is so a descendant of his wrote this paragraph right here and describing a letter that Knight had written from Terre Haute to his wife, and that he mentioned that the wagon broke down and that they were living on meat, that the men were out hunting and shooting wild game as they traipsed across the wilds of Indiana. This is his superior, Alexander McComb. He'd be like the Joint Chief of Staff head today. This is who his immediate boss was. McComb, there's town, county in Michigan named for him. He was an important general. But McComb said, now, okay, so Knight now has, in May of 1828, he's now quit his job as commissioner of the National Road Development and gone to work for the B&O Railroad. And Alexander McComb says that Knight has perfect satisfaction of this department with the manner in which you have fulfilled the object of your appointment of the great national interests. National Road, the national interest. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad will reap great benefits from your skill, industry, and honest endeavor. So, all right. So just to jump. So Knight went to work for the B&O Railroad. The B&O Railroad was also of national interest. The federal government wanted there to be a railroad that went from Baltimore to the Ohio River, just like the National Road did. However, there was no railroads in the United States in 1828. The B&O Railroad chartered was in 1826, but they really hadn't done anything. So they wanted to hire the best engineer to do so. So they hired Knight to be the chief civil engineer for the B&O Railroad. The federal government made available to the B&O Railroad several engineers that were West Point graduates, and Knight managed those and worked with those, and several of those guys later became important railroad builders on other railroads going forward. Okay, so we're here in Indiana. So how populated was Indiana in 1827 when Knight was surveying through our state? Of course, everybody knows Indiana was a state in 1816. And the main thing about our road was the Treaty of St. Mary's was in 1818. And you can see the map here. In 1816, these were the counties in Indiana. All this was still owned by the Indians. Here is Wayne County over here, where Richmond is. And but all this was Delaware and Miami property. But in 1818, General William Henry Harrison negotiated several treaties with the Indians at St. Mary's, Ohio. And the one that's pertinent to us is the Miamis and the Delawares agreed to give up their land. The Delawares received $4,000 in silver, and they were given a blacksmith, and they were given land in Kansas, and they were given 3 years to leave, but they chose to do so almost right away. And this is Chief Anderson of Anderson, Indiana. And so he and his fellow Delawares packed up and took their $4,000 in silver and went west. So the sooner they left, the sooner they would be getting their $4,000 in silver. And one of those, a little side note, Connor, one of the Connors was married to Chief Anderson's daughter, and he told her goodbye. She left with all their children and went west to Kansas, and Connor stayed here, remarried. But this allowed the state of Indiana to now have control of this part of the state, and therefore several years later would allow the national road to come through. So here's another map of the Treaty of St. Mary's. This is map that shows a lot of different treaties. So anyway, they're coming through in 1827. How many people were there? Wayne County had and so the only statistics I can find is Wayne County, where Richmond is. 1820, there were 12,000 people. 10 years later, they'd gone up to 18,000. So in 1827, there were probably 16,000 or something. Henry County, where Knightstown is, had in 1820 census, they had 322 people. So there were probably, several thousand in Henry County when Knight came through. And Hancock County, none. Nobody was living over there. And then Marion County in 1820, 0. But now there's 7,100 people. So when Knight came through Indianapolis, maybe there were 5,000 people living here. So, quite a few folks. And here's another map showing the Delaware. And then 1830, now all these counties, including Henry and Rush and all these counties are now, since the Indians have left, we're able to do. So this is kind of the same statistics. I'm repeating myself here. And but Indianapolis, here's important. They actually moved the capital from Corydon to here in 1825. So the capital would have been here when Knight came through. So I'm from Knightstown. Why was Knightstown named Knightstown? So the guy that founded Knightstown was a guy with an unusual first name of Weitzel, last name Carey. Weitzel, I decided, was lucky. And here's Weitzel, the only known photograph of Weitzel Carey, sharp looking guy. And 1821, he went down to the Brookville office. He was the second guy in Henry County, and he bought 80 acres of land from the federal government. And, he was smart enough to know that this was land that's set up high in between Blue River and Montgomery Creek. And his brother Samuel bought the 80 acres next to him. Samuel would shortly die there later. But Weitzel Carey bought the land. Here's a copy of his deed that he got from Brookville in 1821. So anyway, he lucked out. The national road is on a straight line from Richmond to Indianapolis. Knightstown's on a straight line from there, and so it went right through. So he had Knightstown platted in 1827 when Knight came through. I can't verify that this is Knight's penmanship, but certainly he was involved in Knightstown being platted, and they named it on this down here. It's two words, Knightstown. Of course, it's been one word forever, I think, since. A couple of interesting tidbits. What is now Main Street was Clay Street, as in Henry Clay. So Knight was a Whig politically. He was politically a Whig, as was Abe Lincoln politically a Whig, and Henry Clay was the head of the Whig Party, and they were, we might call them progressives, but the main thing that we're related to is they were for internal improvements. They wanted the harbors to be dredged. They wanted canals to be built. They wanted roads to be built. And they felt like the federal government should pay for those things. And so, when you look at Knight's voting records in the Pennsylvania State Senate and the U.S. Congress, he's always voting in favor of internal improvements, making but the opposite, the Democrats and Andrew Jackson, they thought that the federal government shouldn't pay for any of this stuff. That if Philadelphia wants their harbor dredged, then Pennsylvania needs to pay to dredge their harbor. The federal government should not be putting up lighthouses. And but the Whigs and so there was two-party system, and the Whigs and the Democrats. And actually, and the other thing about the Whigs, they were kind of the anti-Andrew Jackson party. They really got involved and a lot of followers that were anti-Jackson. So we'll see. All right. So as I said earlier, he goes to work for the B&O Railroad, and we've all played Monopoly. But the B&O Railroad goes from Baltimore to the Ohio River to get all that freight. Okay, the B&O was the first railroad operated in the United States for public use. Knight went to work for him in 28, immediately after his work as the surveyor for the National Road. So the B&O Railroad was founded by about 20, 30 Baltimore businessmen, important people, including Johns Hopkins. He was one of the stockholders. They floated stock. They had a bunch of stock. There was a lot of politics involved. They had to get the state of Maryland to agree to pay some money, help fund it. They had to get the state of Pennsylvania to help fund it. So they sent Knight and two other guys, both of them West Point engineers, traveled to England to study railroads because there was a couple little fledgling railroads over there. One of the guys that went with him was Whistler's father, who was an engineer, and Whistler's father became an important railroad builder later on, and probably gave Whistler enough free money to go be an artist, I guess. So when they all got back, they appointed Knight the chief engineer of the B&O Railroad. He was the head of all engineering. So he located the roads, planned the structures and machinery, including the trains, engines. He did math calculations to create the least friction of wheels to rails. And just a little side note, there wasn't a steel industry really in America. So the first rails, they shipped from England over to the United States on a clipper ship of some sort. So, and he did a lot of respected spokesman for the B&O. So Knight would go before the Virginia committees to get money appropriated before the Pennsylvania appropriated. The first railroad was horse-drawn, but wasn't soon after that they invented a steam engine there and that could work. Knight was involved. Knight was involved in the early development of steam engines. They were vertical to begin with. He made them horizontal. There was many different ones built. If anybody ever gets to Baltimore, go out to the B&O Railroad Museum. They have some and replicas of others. Here's his greatest invention that he could have been a billionaire. The conical wheel. So if you're going down, if you got an axle and a wheel and you're going down a straight line and you're not on rails, you can kind of turn. But on rails, if you try to turn, you'll fall off. So he developed this. See how the wheel here is beveled? Here's, of course, the track. The wheel's beveled, and then here's this flange. Okay, here we are on the other side. So this train's going this way, and it's beveled. So when it goes around the bend, this flange holds it from slipping off this rail, but allows it to come over here. And so then when they go bend the other way, the conical wheel or beveled wheel allows them to go the other way. So Jonathan Knight and his found one tidbit that his daughters lamented that he didn't patent this because every train in the world has this kind of wheel on it ever since Knight development. I told y'all I found a lot of research here. I found 33 letters that he'd written to his sister in Ohio over about an 18-year period. So they were great reference. Half of them talk about his farming, and then half of them he talks about other things and quite unique. And somebody in the 1950s found them in an attic and printed them up. And they're at the Duke Library and they're at the Notre Dame Library. I think this guy was affiliated with Notre Dame somehow. And in his little tidbit where he typed up and described it, he said, and they said that Jonathan Knight kept a diary. So I spent a lot of time trying to find that diary, but I have not found it. So here's flat out the first rails that he got from England. They were flat. So here's a wood beam on cross ties, and that's just a flat piece of steel that the rail cars. When Knight developed T-rail, as did other people develop T-rails. So it didn't take long for them to come up with the T-rail concept, and the conical wheel worked on that. Here was kind of an odd thing. So the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Virginia is going to let them to build the B&O Railroad to build this railroad track. I guess they gave them eminent domain or something. And so somebody thought, well, just like a road, everybody ought to be able to put their train on there and run their train up and down here. So this is Knight's argument. He says locomotive engines and their trains managed and ordered by different companies cannot be successfully run upon the same railway. This is he's testifying before a Pennsylvania State Committee, trying to convince them that, yeah, the B&O Railroad is going to build this, but we're going to own it and run it, and nobody else is going to get to use it. So Knight is also the B&O Railroad turned out. Additionally, they made a lot more money. They ran a line down to Washington, D.C. from D.C. to Baltimore. This is his map of D.C. and there's a little blow up, shows Knight's signature right here. And so he was responsible, and he talks a lot about how there's going to be a lot of passengers and freight going up and down the eastern seaboard. So he was entrepreneur and intelligent businessman. He retired from B&O Railroad in 1842 after 14 years. If you Google Jonathan Knight, this is it'd say engineer for the B&O Railroad, and this surveying thing that he did through Indiana is not the thing that he's most famous for, but he retired after 14 years, and in some of his letters to his sister, he talks about how weary he is. This is before, and he'd be gone for 6, 8, 10 months out surveying through the mountains of Appalachia, and so he was very involved, as I said earlier, politically. He was a U.S. congressman, a state senator. He was, of course, the commissioner of the National Road. His home county, he was initially he was a county commissioner for several years, and then after he retired from the B&O, he did some consulting work. And then the town of Wheeling hired him. The road hadn't been built all the way over to Wheeling. And so Pittsburgh wanted the railroad to come to Pittsburgh. And so he became a lobbyist for the town of Wheeling. And here's a little more about that. The Whig Party, Henry Clay, and supported internal improvements. The Whigs were for a high tariff. So they'd be popular today. And they won the National Bank, which, Jackson hated the National Bank. They were the anti-Jackson party. They were strong supporter of Henry Clay. Jonathan Knight named one of his sons Henry Clay. So that's how, and then as I mentioned earlier, Main Street in Knightstown was named for him. While a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate, Knight was one of the 5 members of the Inland Navigation and Internal Improvements Committee. And in 1825, he is listed as voting in favor of the Pennsylvania Canal to connect Susquehanna with the Ohio River. That never happened, but everybody wanted it to. So Knight was elected to Congress for the 34th Congress, March. So he served one term from March of 55 to 57. This is what the U.S. Capitol looked like when Knight went to Washington. The dome had not been completed, and it wasn't completed until the Lincoln administration. Kind of looks like our Indiana State Capitol dome here under construction. So the 34th Congress was wild. I've really enjoyed learning about this. It was one of the most decisive ever. The issue was slavery. So it was the last 2 years of the Franklin Pierce presidency. Pierce was a Democrat. Pierce was a Northern Democrat that was in favor of slavery. And so the Whig Party was starting to die off. The Whigs had never really taken much of a stand on slavery, pro or con. And so the Whig Party was dissolved. Henry Clay had died. So there were about 5 political parties at the 34th Congress, unique in American history. The Republicans had just a couple guys elected. They were just starting. And so the Whigs, opposition, American parties, those are the guys, they were the know-nothings. They didn't like Catholics and stuff. So, and then the election of the House Speaker took 133 ballots. So, here a couple of years ago, it took 5 or 7 to get a speaker. And so they didn't really start until February. So it took all 3 months or so before they could ever conduct any business. So they finally got a speaker, and it was Nathaniel Banks of Massachusetts. The big issue was what we kind of refer to as bleeding Kansas. In the Compromise of 1850, popular sovereignty had been approved. So the state of Kansas and Nebraska, those people could vote themselves whether they wanted to have slavery or not. So the war broke out in Kansas, where the pro-slavery and anti-slavery people were killing each other, including John Brown. And so this all made the political turmoil that was taking place. And then on May 22nd, 1856, Congressman Preston Brooks walked across the Capitol building to the Senate chamber and caned Senator Charles Sumner almost to death, beat him unconscious, and that proved to everyone that the conflict was terrible. So Knight in Congress, he voted to censor Preston Brooks. Congress passed a measure to censor him, but it failed. Knight voted in his voting record to censor Preston Brooks, but it failed. Knight was opposed to slavery, but thought it was the existing states' rights to decide their own question of slavery. This is the same position that Abe Lincoln had when he was a Whig in the 1840s and 50s. The Constitution said slavery was legal, and therefore a state could have slavery if it wanted to have slavery. But so that was his position. It was Lincoln's position early on that if a state did want to have slavery, they could have slavery because it was constitutional. We're strict followers of the Constitution. So in one of the letters to his sister, he makes this statement. As I said, the Whig Party collapsed. Knight had been elected as Whig, so Knight did not get reelected to the second term of Congress. And another reason, besides the Whig Party collapsing, the presidential victor that year was James Buchanan, who was a Pennsylvanian. So you can imagine everybody in Washington County, Pennsylvania, would have voted for their home state guy. And so Knight lost by 1,000-something votes and did not get reelected. So I think he was okay with that. He went back to full-time farming. He had purchased his first farm in Washington County in 1815. He founded several agricultural societies in his town, in his county. Jonathan Knight and his wife Ann had 10 children. 7 of them lived to adulthood. They were all boys. William and a couple others moved to Iowa to farm. Knight actually owned some land in Iowa out around Oskaloosa, where William Penn College is, if y'all know that area of the world. And one of the boys was named Henry Clay. One of them was named David Shriver, who was Knight's boss when he surveyed the national road in Pennsylvania. One of them was named after the Beale, the guy that had hired him to plat his town. One of his sons attended the first Republican Party convention in Jackson, Mississippi, and made the motion to name the party Republican. Abel Knight, his youngest son, sold the farm after Knight's death and moved to Michigan. And the lady that donated the 500-page book and the portrait is Irene Knight Patton. She was a great-great-granddaughter there at Washington Jefferson College. Here's all his kids. So Knight's farm was on the national road, and here are some pictures. Most of this is all destroyed and not there anymore. This part back here was actually his house. This was added after his death. So this is still sitting there. It's owned by some unrelated people. They won't allow anybody to come there. Knight is buried there at the Westland Cemetery in Washington County, the Quaker Cemetery. This tombstone was put there long after his death. Quakers did not have tombstones. And our Knightstown friends, Paul and Patty Zur, took this picture. And so His wife, Ann, actually moved to Michigan, and she's actually buried wherever Pontiac, around Pontiac, Michigan. She's buried up there. This is his sister, Ann, who he wrote all the letters to. She's kind of centerfold material. All right, Knightstown, named for Jonathan Knight, a good place to visit, a better place to live. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Viewing up. Well, like I said,
Well, no. And I was asked this question a while back. Did he ever come back through? And I mentioned he owned some land in Iowa. Well, I read this account where one of these sons got on a steamboat and sailed down the Monongahela, down the Ohio, up the Mississippi, and that's how he got to Iowa. So I'd previously assumed that when he went to Iowa, that he would have gone back through on the national road through Knightstown. So I don't know if he ever made it back to Knightstown or not. So yeah, question unanswered. Yeah. Jane? Yes, remotely. So I mentioned that other photograph of him, that's not the book photograph. So I found on Facebook this gal who appears to be in her 30s and has some little kids. And she is a descendant of William Knight, the oldest, and they have the album. And so in my book, I have a picture of William and his wife, and she sent me pictures, snapshots from the album. And she said her grandmother owns the album and her mother will get it when grandma dies. And she said, I'll get it. And so I asked her 8 different ways if I could come look at that. And she never, and I don't know where she lives or where grandma lives or anything. So that's the only descendants I found. I told you that there was supposedly a diary. So all of these 7 sons, I traced them as far as I could to, and like one was in California, and so I would call he was in Whittier, California. The Quaker, Nixon was from Whittier, California. And so anyway, I would call that museum or historical society there and said, do you have any Jonathan Knight stuff or whatever the son's name was? And so I did that in Iowa. I called 4 or 5 different museums in Iowa. So trying to find this holy grail of Jonathan Knight's diary. Yes, sir.
You survey plats and survey notes for Indiana, got proof from the National Archives to here.
Yes.
You know what happened to the surveys and survey notes for the state of Ohio?
No, I don't. And I asked. And I finally got a guy over there, and did I send him some money? I finally got a guy that answered lots of my questions at the National Archives. And he could not find those because these ones that we have here are great. I mean, they're hard to read, but they're all there, and they're real entertaining as he's coming across my area of interest across eastern Indiana. He mentions farmers that he says, I'm 1 league from Jones's barn. And one of the guys he mentions is Shortridge, some guy named Shortridge living in eastern Indiana. Don't know if it's any relation. And then the most interesting to me was he was Strawn's Orchard. And there's a little town of Strawn, Indiana, there on the national road today. So back then it was just Mr. Strawn's farm and he had a peach orchard or something. But no, I could not find the Ohio field notes.
During the process of doing research we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
In 1800, Ohio legislature passed a bill, measure state road. From southern Ohio up through, into over the Wheeler.
Yeah,
Basically to replace Thames Trace.
okay,
Totally by accident, we found a plat for one county. It was buried in a fire cabinet in Fairfield County, Ohio. Nobody really existed.
yeah,
Never, ever able to find any more plats for that state road.
yeah, huh,
But that, like you mentioned, that plat was farm to farm, how far it was from house to house. It fits
Right.
on there who owned the house.
yeah.
And
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find those field notes for Ohio. I didn't mention, so Knight was supposed to then go on to Illinois and survey on to Vandalia, but he quit. And I'm sure it's because he got a better job at the B&O Railroad. I calculated that he made maybe 1,000 or two, it's in the book. Oh, everybody needs to buy the book. It's in the book, $1,200 or something. But the B&O Railroad paid him $3,000 a year. So he got, and I think the federal government wanted him to. They wanted him to be the chief engineer of this new exciting railroad business. And his assistant surveyor coming across Indiana is a man named Shriver, same last name as his boss back in Pennsylvania 8 or 10 years earlier. So Shriver then did the work through Illinois to Vandalia.
Rick, question, I don't remember where I read this, it's been some time ago. At some point, the actual construction of the national road went from federal subsidy to state subsidy.
So the federal government kind of got out of it in the 40s. They wanted to quit funding it, like everything. And so, as I understand it, the best book, if you want to read a book about the National Road, there's a fellow named Peckinpah wrote a book 4 or 5 years ago. He's out of Ohio, and trying to think of the name. I think it's something, the first interstate highway in America or something. And his name's Peckinpah. But he talks about the crazy thing, instead of building the road like they did in Ohio, east to west, they started in Indianapolis and built it. They had one guy in charge of building it that way and one guy in charge of building it that way. And so finally, that wasn't working. And they hired a guy named Ogden, which I thought he was a Corps of Engineer guy. He was a soldier from the Department of War. This is the Department of War is responsible for building it. And we got a little town in Henry County named Ogden that was named after this guy Ogden. And so I think he took over the construction and made it happen. But then the federal government got out of it. They gave the road to the states. The states didn't want to fund it either, or they didn't fund it very well. Indiana went bankrupt, and so then they put up toll booths. They actually, I think they did a couple things. One, they turned it over to the counties or townships to manage it, or they put it out on contract and sold it to somebody or somebody. I've got so there was a covered bridge over Blue River at Knightstown. And so this little blurb in the Greenfield paper says, Joe Schmo, I forget his name, the leader, the commissioner of the National Road has taken the roof off the covered bridge. And, and so anyway, he evidently had the contract to manage the national road in that area of the world. So, yeah, no, I think he was exhausted. I think he was physically exhausted. He writes back to his sister how tired he is. And then the fact that he got this bigger and better job at, this new exciting thing of building a railroad. Any more questions? All right, I'd be glad to sign a book back there. We're selling them for $25. If you want to donate $25 to somebody, you can. If you want to give it to my wife, you can. But I appreciate everybody being here. And if you got any more questions, I'll be around here for a little bit. Thank you.